What if I told you that a single phone call dragged Captain Ibrahim Traore into the deadliest mission of his entire life? One moment, one decision, and suddenly more than 800 souls stood on the edge of disappearing, forever traded like cattle in markets hidden beyond the horizon. Deep in the underbelly of Ouagadougou, a trafficking empire worth 500 million CFA was tightening its grip, ready to dissolve into the night without leaving even the faintest trace. Inside steel containers, infants gasped for air, stacked like forgotten cargo. Women heavy with life were drugged, their wrists tagged with numbers as if they were inventory. Children's young bodies bore marks of a future already sold to the black market, their organs priced before they had even tasted the freedom of adolescence. And somewhere far above the shadows, a powerful hand already knew. That was the moment Traoré gave the order that shattered silence, lock the files, trust no one, and prepare to strike. Not tomorrow. Tonight. What followed was not a mission, it was survival written in fire. 48 hours of betrayal sandstorms that swallowed convoys, whole gunfire echoing across the desert night. If they failed, Africa itself would choke on the knowledge that human life had been reduced to currency, a currency no leader could ignore again. In Ouagadougou, rain poured down like prophecy. Golden lamps flickered against black pools of water, painting ghostly shapes across empty streets. An armored vehicle skidded to a halt. Its steel door burst open. Out stepped Captain Ibrahim Traore, his vest heavy with rain and sweat, his face carved with the kind of resolve that only men who carry entire nations know. In a dim command room, a broken voice whispered through the satellite line, "We found their base. But you have only 48 hours before they vanish with everything." This was not a mission, it was a countdown against Africa's most ruthless trafficking syndicate. A network valued at over 150 million. From the Sahara's edge to the ports of Libya, they controlled migration routes like veins moved lives, as if they were shipments of grain and armed militias stretching from Niger's deserts to Sudan's war zones. But the haunting question lingered in the air. How had this empire remained untouchable for so long? How many children from the northern villages of Burkina Faso had been erased before sunrise, their laughter stolen into silence? Captain Traoré didn't blink. He had memorized maps stained with red markers, every one of them a site of agony. But those weren't just points on paper. They were cries of blood carved into the earth itself. Could an empire built on flesh and bones be dismantled in just 48 hours? That night the desert would not forget. It would burn. First came silence, then shadows shifting, then war. And now I ask you, where are you watching from today? Drop it in the comments. If this fight matters to you, if you believe no child should be sold, then subscribe, share this story, and help raise a new voice for Africa's dignity. The operations room was not filled with smoke, but it was suffocating all the same, thick with the gravity of what was unfolding. On the steel table in the center lay an enormous military map, stretched and battered, punctured by rows of thin red pins. They carved across the Sahel like a scarred spine, a crooked trail of violence that refused to fade. From the dust-choked dunes of northern Burkina Faso to the chaotic docks of Libya, those pins were not mere coordinates. They were silent witnesses. Each one was a wound. Each one marked a crime scene that still bled. These are confirmed staging posts, the intelligence officer said at last, his voice low but cutting like a knife against glass. Desert crossings, secret safe houses, containers posing as humanitarian shipments. They vanished without leaving even shadows. Captain Traoré said nothing. He bent closer to the map, his face caught in the dim glow of the overhead bulb eyes locked on the thick clusters of red swelling around Gao, and then Saba. Why there? Why so many children swallowed whole at those points? The silence thickened until another officer, pale and trembling, stepped forward with a folder. His hands shook as he slid the brown file onto the cold metal table. "Satellite imagery confirms our worst fears," he murmured, each word trembling. "This isn't only trafficking, it's harvesting. Infants, pre-teens, snatched from their families, gone within hours." The room froze, not from shock, they had seen horror before, but as though the very air had been stolen from their lungs. How far did this machine stretch its claws? How many ministers posed for cameras in daylight only to ink their signatures on contracts in the shadows of night? A commander finally broke the suffocating stillness, his throat dry as sand. Some of the names in the leaked ledgers, they match current security officials. The words struck the table like the slam of a blade. Betrayal laid bare. Who within Burkina Faso's own ranks was feeding coordinates directly to butchers? Captain Traoré slowly straightened, the weight of command pressing into his shoulders. When he finally spoke, his voice carried no hesitation, no warmth, only iron. From this moment forward, this room ceases to exist. No one breathes a word outside these walls. His eyes cut to the communications officer. Encrypt every file, pull every terminal offline, shut down phones. No transmissions, face-to-face only. If there's a leak, it dies here. The officer nodded sharply already, yanking cable screens going dark one by one. Then another general voice, heavy with dread, asked the unspoken question, "And if the leak comes from higher up from one of us?" Traoré's gaze fixed on him, steady and cold, holding for a long beat before he answered. "Then he will be arrested like the rest. I don't care how many medals they've pinned to his chest." The words cut the air like steel. Could a nation survive when it no longer knew which of its veins carried lifeblood and which carried venom? From the far end of the chamber, someone finally whispered the thought that had been gnawing at everyone's mind. If they've placed their own inside our ranks, then every move we make is already compromised. Burkina Faso was no stranger to betrayal. Only months earlier, a coup plot had unraveled when a single intercepted message from Côte d'Ivoire exposed the truth military precision masquerading as political protest. That lesson still burned fresh. And at the African Union, Kenya's President William Ruto had warned his peers behind closed doors. What you face in West Africa is not simple insurgency. It is orchestration, designed, financed, directed. Now, in this underground war room, one question pressed heavier than the walls themselves with 48 hours on the clock. How many of those hours truly belonged to them, and how many were already lost? The intelligence chief broke the silence, sliding a folder across the table. Inside, high-resolution images from a drone feed flickered into view, a convoy crawling across the desert floor like a steel serpent. Trucks reinforced with armor roofs lined with gunmen, the shadows of children faintly visible behind iron bars welded into cages. Painted boldly on the sides were NGO logos, fraudulent registered in Malta, rerouted through Tunisia, false seals that screamed legitimacy to anyone not willing to look deeper. Same path the cartels used in 2016, the officer muttered, his tone sharp with disgust. Only now it's cleaner, sanitized with paperwork, legal on the outside, death on the inside. Who could build a machine this ruthless, yet invisible to the world? Another analyst traced his finger across the map until it stopped at the Mediterranean coast. Nearly every route bleeds into Sabratha and Zouara. Those two ports alone push out hundreds of unregistered vessels each week. The real question is how many never dock. And if those holds carry children instead of rifles, then who signs the checks? Who dares to profit from this trade in ghosts? Captain Traoré's silence filled the room. Slowly he stepped back from the map, his gaze sweeping across the 12 men around him. All of them sworn to loyalty, all of them armed, and yet tonight each carried a weight heavier than their sidearms, the knowledge that treachery could be standing inches away. "Lock down this compound," Traoré ordered, his voice calm but final. "Strip staff to minimum. If anyone attempts to leave, detain them. From this moment forward, the mission exists only here. We either vanish into silence or we fail." No one clapped. No one saluted. Only the dull echo of boots moving toward the sealed doors, like the sound of a verdict being carried out. Somewhere between silence and the coming storm, a clock began to tick. Out in the desert, the convoy rolled deeper into the night, headlights blacked out, guided only by the invisible eyes of infrared. 5 armored vehicles in a line snaking through dirt tracks, 22 kilometers from the Malian border. The earlier rain had hardened into dust, but the tension in the air clung like fire waiting to ignite. Inside the lead vehicle, Captain Traoré sat like carved stone helmet, strapped, tight eyes unblinking on the road ahead. His right hand rested across the rifle pressed to his chest, but his thoughts drifted beyond the steel and dust. He had combed through the dossier 3 times. One window, one strike, one chance. If they missed by the time the sun rose, 172 human beings would be reduced to shadows in memory. Then came the signal. A flicker from the overhead drone, nothing more than a blink of light against the black sky. Immediately, all 5 armored vehicles froze in perfect synchronization, engines growling low before cutting to silence. Before them, half buried in the earth, stood a warehouse, its corrugated steel walls, rusting edges eaten by years of sand and wind. No signs, no floodlights. To the casual eye, it was nothing but a carcass of industry left behind. But the satellites told another story. Heat signatures packed far too tightly, pulsing in rhythms too human to belong to machinery. Traoré lifted his fist, the command of silence. His unit dissolved into motion like water. 2 shadows slipped to the right flank. 2 more swept to the left, while the last element sealed the rear perimeter, rifles raised in the dark. The breach came quiet and merciless. No thunder of explosives. No splintering doors. Only the muted flash of grenades that stole sound without fire, and the hiss of bolt cutters biting into chains. Inside, the blackness pressed down heavy, swallowing their breath. Rows upon rows of shipping containers stood like iron coffins, silent, weighting the air thick with dread. Then it came, a dull thud, a shiver of steel, the faint, desperate knock of a human hand, a cough rattling out of the shadows, a child's thin whimper breaking the silence like glass. Here one of the soldiers breathed, voice tight with urgency. The team converged. Sparks screamed as the cutters bit through locks one by one. When the first door swung open, the smell hit like a physical blow. It was the stench of captivity, sweat, blood, and despair, packed so dense it clung to every lungful of air. And then the sight, a sea of bodies jammed tighter than freight. Mothers clutching infants too weak to cry. Boys with faces still soft, but eyes already hollow. Old men gasping like fish wrists bound in crude plastic ties. A young girl's ankles bore raw gashes where restraints had rubbed her skin raw and bleeding. How long had the world turned its head away from this? Captain Traoré stepped forward, jaw rigid. From the darkness, a child's hand reached out, trembling voice cracking like paper, torn in two. "Don't let them take me again. Please." How many times had those words been whispered into silence, never answered, never heard? The units worked with speed born of desperation. One squad moved container to container, 9 in total, breaking locks, pulling open doors, lifting out those too weak to walk. Another unit triaged the survivors, pressing bottles of water to cracked lips, wrapping blankets across emaciated shoulders, driving glucose into veins of bodies hanging on the razor's edge of death. Some collapsed the instant light touched them, their strength spent in the act of staying alive. A medic looked up, face grave, voice low. "Severe dehydration, infections everywhere. If we don't move them tonight, some won't last." "Evac status," Traoré demanded. "Helos inbound. 15 minutes. He shook his head, eyes hard. "We've got 10. But fate was faster. The cracks split the night air, sharp and close. Automatic fire followed, metal tearing sparks showering the steel walls. "Contact northeast wall," a soldier shouted, voice drowned by gunfire. A flanking unit was pinned. Figures emerged from the black faces, wrapped eyes glowing behind night scopes, rifles steady and cold. They did not scream, they did not rush. They fired with surgical precision, forcing the rescuers backward, herding them toward the very containers they had just ripped open. Who had warned them? Who knew the exact moment of the strike? Traoré didn't pause. His hand cut the air in a hard signal. "Push them back. Hold the breach." His command cut through the chaos like a blade, and his squad surged forward as one, crashing against the enemy like a living wave. Steel met steel, fire met fire. Bullets chewed through crates, punched holes across the concrete floor, sparks exploding where lead kissed iron. A soldier cried out, thigh torn open. Another stumbled with blood streaking his arm, but the line refused to break. Inside the warehouse, the chaos multiplied. Children screamed in terror, their cries piercing above the gunfire. Mothers hunched low, wrapping their bodies around infants as if fragile flesh could shield them from the storm of bullets. Smoke grenades hissed and bloomed, swallowing the room in thick gray fog, choking out vision, turning the battlefield into a blur of sound and instinct. The enemy tried to slip around the flanks, but they had misjudged their opponent. Traoré had studied this dance before. He moved through the haze with unnerving, calm eyes, cutting through smoke where others saw only confusion. He circled wide, flanking the flankers, and caught 2 gunmen in the open. One, controlled, burst from his rifle, and they crumpled into silence. No hesitation, no mercy. Suppress left. Advance, his voice carried like iron through the storm. 3 savage minutes later, the warehouse perimeter was theirs. Smoke cleared to reveal 2 attackers pinned to the ground, 3 sprawled lifeless, and 1 ghost who had melted into the scrubland beyond. But the question gnawed even louder than the gunfire. What made them fight with such ferocity? What prize was worth dying for? What currency outweighed the breath of 172 innocent souls? Secure the prisoners, Traoré ordered. His eyes swept the wreckage. 1 captive carried more than a rifle. Hidden in his pouch was a compact encrypted terminal, sleek and military grade. Not local, not African. The tech officer's brows furrowed as he studied it. European build, he muttered, voice tight. Looks Spanish, maybe German. Whoever funds this, it isn't militia money. The thunder of rotors shook the earth as helicopters descended. Extraction had begun. Container by container, victims were lifted into the night, carried toward survival. Final count: 172 souls pulled back from the abyss. 49 children, 72 women, 51 men. Of those children, 19 had not yet reached the age of 5. And this was only one site. How many more still hidden beneath the desert, whispering cries the world refused to hear? Traoré stood at the last container, silent. The same little girl who had begged him not to let them take her again was now wrapped in a blanket, head resting against his arm. She said nothing. She didn't have to. Her trembling silence lit a fire inside him, hotter than any bullet ever could. From the seized device, the evidence spilled like revelation onto the screen at briefing. Satellite images marked coordinates blurred but traceable: an abandoned phosphate mine 70 kilometers east of Hambri, central Mali. On paper, it was dead, officially dormant for years. But the thermal scans told another story: vehicles slipping in and out at night, drones dropping payloads under cover of dark. Hours earlier, one brief encrypted transmission had pulsed from that location, and then silence. Traoré didn't hesitate. We move now, his voice cold and absolute. If they scrub those servers, everything vanishes with them. A logistics officer tried to argue, voice weary. Sir, our fuel reserves are low. The men haven't rested. Traoré cut him off, his tone like granite. There is no rest. Not while they herd people like livestock. Launch in 20. Engines roared to life. 2 helicopters clawed upward into the night blades, chopping the heavy air into thunder. On the ground, armored convoys growled forward, wheels biting deep into the clay. The terrain shifted quickly, red earth hardening into jagged stone, then tightening into narrow canyons, forcing the convoy into single file, like prey being funneled into a trap. Inside the vehicles, radios crackled, then died. Silence replaced the static. Every man knew what it meant. These roads were graveyards. Ambushes had bled missions dry here before traps sprung 5 minutes after warnings arrived too late. Then sudden light. A flash ripped across the horizon, and another. Searchlights from the Mi-191 helicopters carved long, blinding arcs through the twilight sky beams, slashing across ridgelines as if clawing for secrets hidden in the dark. Static crackled through the headset. Movement spotted, the pilot barked. Convoy, 4 trucks, fast, heading north. Captain Traoré didn't waste a breath. His voice came sharp, metallic, unflinching. Intercept. Take out the lead, trap the rest. Engines roared, rotors hammered the air, and the hunt closed in. The desert itself seemed to vibrate with the raw electricity of pursuit. But the fleeing convoy wasn't chaotic. They moved too clean, too precise, soldiers trained, not smugglers panicked. One truck broke formation, swerving left. Another braked hard, deliberately drawing attention. Classic bait, classic misdirection. But Traoré had seen it before. He raised his hand, slicing the air. Ignore it. Eyes on the lead. That's the cargo they can't afford to lose. And then the ridge lit up. Gunfire cracked from above, tracer rounds cutting lines of fire into the night. Traoré's men answered with a savage burst, shredding tires, ricochets sparking against stone. The lead truck screamed sideways, slammed broadside into a boulder, and ground to a violent halt. The side door creaked open, groaning under twisted steel. From the shadows stepped a man, not frantic, not armed but composed. Tall in a dark tailored jacket, a black briefcase gripped casually in one hand. No weapon, no fear. Just the cold arrogance of someone who believed the rules would never touch him. His guards were less composed. They fired wildly, then scattered for cover discipline, bleeding into panic. "Hold fire," Traoré ordered, voice like thunder, cutting through chaos. "I want him alive." The man stopped in the open, unfazed. He met Traoré's stare, and with a thin smile whispered words that dripped with disdain. "You're late." Traoré's jaw tightened. His reply landed like a verdict. "You're finished." The man's face wasn't listed in any file, no fingerprint, in any archive. But the briefcase spoke louder than his silence. Inside lay two hardened drives, both sealed with biometric locks. One labeled South Route, the other Client Ledger. Taped across them was a handwritten string of codes, and beneath it a single name scrawled in ink and underlined twice Alumbra: the Shadow Gatekeeper. A ghost whispered about in fractured reports, one of the architects of the Trans-Sahel slave corridors. Fluent in 4 languages, educated in Bern, once registered as a contractor for a Madrid security firm before vanishing into the underworld in 2018. Now here he was, standing in the dust, holding the keys to a network laundering more than $30 million a year, washed clean through Malta, Cyprus, and shell companies buried deep inside UAE trusts. How many years had he lived in plain sight, shaking hands at conferences, sipping wine in European capitals, while hundreds of children vanished beneath his balance sheets? How many governments had chosen to look away, calling it regional stability, while signing checks stained in blood? Technicians cracked open the case. On the briefing screen, the drives came alive. The gatekeeper only smiled, his arrogance venomous. "You won't get far. Without me, the locks won't open. You don't have the keys." Traoré's eyes never wavered. "We have your fingers." The man chuckled, confident. "Cut them, burn them, biometrics die with the pulse. No torture will make these drives talk." Traoré's voice was ice. "I don't need torture. I need time." Back at the mobile command, the illusion cracked. Sirens screamed. A technician shouted above the noise. One of the drives just pinged an external node in Senegal. It triggered a purge protocol, screens filled with cascading red warnings. "Data wipe in progress, 40% already gone." All eyes snapped to the gatekeeper. Traoré stepped closer, rage burning just below his composure. "Override it, now!" But the man only grinned wider, savoring the unraveling. It's too late. By now the chain is burning across every server. Lagos, Tripoli, Marseille. One by one the links vanish. Every name, every record gone. He leaned in, voice dripping with triumph. "It's over, Captain." But from the far corner, a voice cut through the despair. A young analyst, pale but glowing with adrenaline, spoke up. "Not over. I cloned the packets as they transmitted. We didn't block them, we mirrored them." The room stilled. Traoré turned, eyes sharp. "What do you have?" The analyst's hands shook, but his words came steady. "Everything. Full transaction logs, account trails, government IDs, Panama bank codes, recipients, names." His voice cracked on the last word, but his eyes were alight with fire. "All of them. How deep did the infection run? How many signatures inked in polished offices? How many seals pressed into parchment had been buried inside those files, silently legitimizing horror?" For the first time, the gatekeeper's mask slipped. His confidence wavered, eyes breaking from Traoré's stare, if only for a heartbeat. "You thought yourself untouchable," the captain said, voice low, but cutting. "But even shadows leave footprints." Within minutes, the mirrored transmission was routed directly to Interpol and locked under encryption inside Ghana's cyber forensics unit, guarded under the personal authority of President Nana Akufo-Addo. As the horizon split into gray and the abandoned phosphate mines rose from the earth, dawn bled across the Sahel. But this was not closure. It was ignition. The war hadn't ended. It had simply changed its face. The struggle for truth had just opened its first chapter. Operation Falcon struck like a lightning storm. 5 simultaneous assaults. 3 regions. No warning shots, no hesitation, only the ruthless rhythm of precision. In the northern hub of Dori, 2 tactical teams stormed a bus terminal that seemed ordinary to the casual eye. The peeling sign above the door read, "Westine Travel, nothing more than a gateway for commuters." But when officers pried open the chamber beneath the ticket counter, they unearthed stacks of ledgers, movement logs, and over 70 counterfeit identity documents. One passport bore the seal of Togo, registered to an infant allegedly born 3 months earlier in Kaya. How many children had been stolen across borders, their existence erased and remade under official stamps that gave slavery the face of legitimacy? Farther west at the edge of Bobo Dioulasso, another warehouse operated under the harmless brand Africell. On paper, it was unlicensed. In practice, it was an artery of horror shipping crates masked as textile aid routed through Guinea-Bissau. Inside its coal-fired chambers, 4 units sat silent, unplugged. Yet chemical residue spoke louder than silence. Tests revealed traces of formalin human blood proteins, multiple DNA strands fused in ash. The chambers weren't for heat, they were for erasure. In Koudougou, a modest building wearing the disguise of a clinic revealed rows of hospital beds' nutrition charts tacked to walls in French, Spanish, Arabic. Syringes stood pre-filled, lined in trays. But there were no doctors, only armed guards subdued in seconds. Healing was never the purpose here. On one seized laptop, investigators unearthed evidence colder than steel recorded calls with buyers in Dubai and Istanbul. Disembodied voices inquired not about goods, but about age, weight, organ compatibility, bargaining as if human children were livestock on an auction block. How had this empire not only survived but thrived in the shadows of African capitals? How many leaders sworn to protect their citizens had traded silence for stability, profit for loyalty? At that same hour, downtown Ouagadougou shuddered as Amani Logistics shutters were blown wide open. Officers stormed inside, seizing 6 computers, 2 safes, and a visitor registry scribbled with names of businessmen linked to elite councils in France and Canada. The digital trails illuminated a grotesque offshore triangle stretching from the Seychelles to Singapore to Malta. On one glowing monitor, a file remained open like a SCAR consignment 348B. Delivery pending. Contact 4 hours post-transfer. Meanwhile, in Gawa, near the gold-rich corridors, a mobile strike force swarmed a derelict factory repurposed into a holding site. Beneath rusted barrels, they pried open a steel hatch, descending into darkness. There, huddled together in a damp underground chamber, 19 human beings sat half-conscious, bodies bruised and broken. 3 of them matched missing child profiles filed with UNICEF the year before. Every survivor carried the same scar, tiny tracking implants embedded in their lower backs, stamped with the logo of a biotech firm headquartered in Tel Aviv. The question hung in the air like smoke. How could cutting-edge medical trackers find their way into the hands of backwater traffickers without layers of political protection shielding the trade? The sweeps dragged on for 6 brutal, unbroken hours. Gunfire was sporadic, resistance scattered. But what the soldiers uncovered went far beyond cages and chains. They had stumbled into the hidden skeleton of impunity itself, the machinery of an empire built not only on flesh, but on silence. Captain Traoré moved between sites like a relentless shadow, his presence a mixture of command and burden. He oversaw every extraction, approved every data seizure, and made certain each chain of custody was locked tight for the eyes of international prosecutors. He knew too well that a single oversight, one corrupted file, could collapse the entire case and set murderers free to rebuild. He would not let that happen. By the end of the first phase, the numbers came in. A total of 832 people pulled from the dark, 320 women, at least 21 carrying unborn lives, 427 children, more than 90 of them not yet 10 years old, and 85 men, most of them skeletal from months of forced labor in the mines along Burkina Faso's east and Mali's southern borders. One officer gave his report through clenched teeth, voice breaking with rage. Some of them were moved 6 times across 4 different countries. Many haven't seen the sun in weeks. At the media holding area, the first detainees were paraded past flashing cameras, shackled and bent low. Among them, 2 senior officers from Burkina Faso's own intelligence service, a former deputy minister of trade, and a private contractor tied to paramilitary operations in Côte d'Ivoire. One man tried to hide his face with his cuffed hands, but the press knew him instantly. Only a few years earlier, he had stood proudly behind President Alassane Ouattara during a UN speech in Geneva. Now he stood disgraced, head bowed, the world watching. The question that followed was heavier than the smoke of battle. Should leaders like Captain Traoré be entrusted with continental authority to tear down these networks, Or will Africa continue outsourcing its justice to international tribunals, always chasing, always one step behind? What do you believe? Add your voice below. And if you stand with this mission, type amen in the comments. Share this story, because silence feeds the very chains that bind. Over 300 gigabytes of evidence were handed to cybercrime specialists flown in from Ghana and Rwanda. Their screens glowed with patterns more damning than any courtroom testimony. Real estate in Nairobi bought with blood money. Cryptocurrency transfers vanishing through Estonia. Cold internal memos referring to extraction quotas and the shelf life of harvested organs. What else had been reduced to numbers, turned into commodities, while the world buried its conscience under statistics and debates? When Captain Traoré finally stepped before the international press, there were no notes, no teleprompters, only conviction burned into every word. His voice carried like a drumbeat. This is not a war against crime. This is a war for dignity. As long as I draw breath, no man, no woman, no child will be sold. Not here, not anywhere. Behind him, rows of rescued children huddled in thermal blankets. Some clutched donated toys as if they were anchors in a storm. Others stared silently, wide-eyed, caught between hope and the memory of chains. A journalist finally broke the silence. "Captain, what comes next?" Traoré didn't raise his voice, didn't embellish. His words were plain, hard, final. "We take them all down. Every buyer, every silent partner, every official who signed their name and pretended not to see." Camera shutters rattled like gunfire, but he did not blink. That same night, the African Union broke its silence with a statement of support for the arrests. Niger's president went further, calling openly for a continental tribunal that would try traffickers under African law. Ghana pledged to convene a summit within the month uniting states against cross-border trafficking. And in Dakar, hundreds gathered outside the European Union liaison office, holding banners painted in red and black that shouted into the night, "No more blood trade. No more lies." Across Africa and the diaspora, in living rooms lit by flickering televisions, in prayer halls and Friday sermons, one name carried a new gravity: Traoré. Not just a soldier in uniform, not just a president bound by protocol, but a sentinel standing guard for lives too small to defend themselves. By the third dawn, the evidence was locked into sealed diplomatic crates, escorted under the watchful eyes of international observers to The Hague. They were not destined to gather dust in archives. They were not trophies for press conferences. They were instruments of justice. Inside those crates lay thousands of pages, bank transfers, biometric files, hospital scans, receipts that treated human beings as if they were cargo. Voices of children who had learned to survive without speech. Photographs that never should have been taken, but which now testified louder than any courtroom witness. Within 48 hours, the International Criminal Court announced a case under Article 7 of the Rome Statute, crimes against humanity through human trafficking in the organ trade. One of the largest, clearest indictments in African legal history. Yet Captain Traoré did not allow himself to celebrate. He stood before the last container, its iron doors swung open, sunlight spilling across steel floors that had once held only darkness. The rescued children stepped out cautiously, blinking into the morning light, as though daylight itself was foreign. Some clutched the hands of strangers in uniform, trusting soldiers they had never met more than the world that had abandoned them. What dreams had been stolen from them when cradles were replaced by cages facing the assembled press? Traoré's words carried no triumph, only resolve. This is not a victory. This is a beginning. And every reporter knew it was true. For what if the drive had never been mirrored? What if the convoy had slipped through the desert unseen? What if the girl's trembling plea had been swallowed by silence? How many horrors were still festering in the shadows, while the world scrolled past headlines and moved on? This story was never about a single raid. It was not only about a network dismantled or 832 lives reclaimed. It was about a continent declaring clearly, defiantly, "We will not look away again." The image of Traoré framed against the rusted containers, with rescued children blinking into the sun, spread like wildfire. It crossed borders in seconds, shared in WhatsApp groups from Atlanta to Accra, whispered in mosques, echoed in churches, reposted on timelines across continents. His words followed. No one, not a minister, not a merchant, has the right to sell a human life. And then the question turned not on him, but on us. What do we do with that echo? Do we build new walls of silence or bridges of outrage? Does this story awaken something in you, reminding you of your ancestors' courage, your family's endurance, your identity as Africans in a world that has too often dismissed your worth? If it does, let it move you. Share it. Speak the names of those rescued. And if you believe in a future where Africa rises free of every chain type, the words Africa Rise in the comments. Let them flow like a river that has been dammed for too long. If this story touched you even for a moment, hit like, subscribe, and ring the bell because the truth must travel farther than the lies. We do not need $1 billion. We need 1 billion voices. Share this with your family chats, with your WhatsApp circles, in your church communities. Let the world know Burkina Faso bows no longer. And if you want the full scope of how this operation unfolded, from encrypted codes in Senegal to betrayals in Côte d'Ivoire, watch the next episode. The truth is waiting, and so is your voice. Stay proud, stay awake, stay with us.